we're seeing a lot more interest in this kind of thing, that even if you may be in this room one of these people that have got this science or technology and want to commercialize, and that's great. Or you might want to just kind of learn this process, like, oh, pair me up with the science and technology so I can learn this process, and then I can apply it to what I want to do, which may be completely different than this particular idea. So that's part of why this, now in the 5th year, now there are over 75 universities, Pitt, as well as all the universities in the DC node, they're all part of this NSF I-Corps National Innovation Network. The way NSF set it up, just as a quick aside, it's sort of like this hub and spoke model for, pick your favorite airline. They have a few hubs around the country, but they can serve lots of different cities. So there are 7 hubs or nodes around the country. One's in DC, 2 in California, 1 in Texas, 1 in the South in Georgia Tech, 1 in the Midwest around University of Michigan in New York. But the goal of that is not like an athletics competitive conferences or whatever. It's really use those as your central hubs so that you have access to the resources most close to you, that are most close to you. And so through that, you basically can get connected to entrepreneurs and investors and other team members across all those 75 universities. And the last thing I'll say before I turn it over to Edmund, and again, keep the post-its coming, we'll kind of make it responsive to what your questions are. As this has grown, the bulk of the 1,000-some teams that have gone to the national program have been NSF-funded teams trying to commercialize their technology, but there are lots of different flavors of this program that have sprouted up. Edmund will talk about some of these too. NIH has adopted a version, and it's geared specifically to the life sciences and tailored to, better suited for whether it's a therapeutic, medical device, or diagnostic. There also is a version, and you're going to hear from some of these team members later from Pitt, that are in this version for scaling educational teaching and learning innovation. So better ways of teaching STEM, and how do you apply this Lean Startup methodology to scale that. There have been versions that we've done in the DC area that have been geared towards public health. So we've been doing a program with the US Department of Health and Human Services applying the same methodology. So this is like what I was saying, it's not just at a startup company, it can be in government. This program might appear to be like many other programs in that, oh, there's some funding available and it's going to help me with the nuts and bolts of starting a company. It actually has zero to do with the nuts and bolts of starting a company. In fact, you probably have plenty of really knowledgeable people in the Pitt ecosystem and the Innovation Institute that can tell you about IP and these other kinds of pieces. The Icore thing, yes, it involves some funding, but it's really more about learning these tools and methods. That's where the real value is in getting out there and trying to make sense of what's out in the marketplace or what customers need or what stakeholders need and translating into a business model. And I say that in quotes because even nonprofits and even government have a business model, otherwise you run out of funding. And that's really what it's all about. So I'm going to stop there and just emphasize that we want this to be answering your questions. So send your questions forward or just interrupt Edmund. I do it all the time.
You can take questions as I come plug up and
okay. Yeah.
If there are any questions.
Anybody else have any?
You better ask, because I have like 500 slides. So this is your opportunity to stop me before I start.
I have one, and I have already one
All right, so good morning. Can everybody hear me all right? I'm not a great podium speaker. I like to walk and talk. So if you can't hear me, just raise a hand and let me know. So I want to give you a little bit of an overview of the Icore program to kind of set the groundwork. Let me just ask a question first, though. How many of you, I know some have probably heard of it, how many of you feel like you understand what it is already? A few people. Excellent. I won't call on you, although I should, to see what you say. So any of you been through Icore at any level? Okay, fantastic. So let me kind of give you my perspective of Icore. I always open with this, and I've now done about 14 national cohorts, if you added up all the NSF ones and the NIH ones that I've done over the past 4.5 years. So I really love the program, which I hope we'll show today, and I want to give you a little bit of my perspective of it and where it came from, and then we'll obviously have time for some questions afterwards. So you may or may not know it, but NSF has about a $7 billion budget, every year.
For now.
And what's that?
For now.
For now. Like, we know that could come down by some amount. We don't know. And NIH is about $30 billion, and I have NIH up here because I just wrapped up a cohort for them last week, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But a lot of money put into research, right? And most of it is fundamental science. But a lot of it does have commercial potential. And it's been almost 5 years now, a little over 5 years ago, this was the question that spurred NSF to actually create Icore. How can we increase the economic impact of some of this research? Because we know it has commercial potential. Some of it just by happenstance, some of it by design, and we're not seeing it get out there the way we want. So what can we do? So there was one person actually inside of the NSF SBIR program that said, hey, I've noticed, anybody here from California? Nobody? Anybody been to California? Couple? Yeah. I always tell people, we all know the cool stuff starts in California, right? And somebody at NSF noticed that Steve Blank, who you may have heard of by now, was teaching a course at Stanford about how to build a startup. Does anybody know what was uniquely different about that course? It's an easy answer, but anybody have a guess? Lean, good. That's definitely good. That's all correct. The primary thing that was intriguing to NSF was that he was teaching it in the engineering school, right? This is the first time they'd ever seen that. Usually business planning and all that was done through the business school, and Steve was teaching it in the engineering school. So NSF said, hey, you know what? If you can apply this sort of scientific method, this process of building a startup in a lean way with scientists, we want to talk. And so that's how the connection was actually made. And so actually they created, and you may, if you've read any of Steve Blank's material, hear this phrase, Lean Launchpad. That was the name of the class. But the name of the program is Icore. And Icore here recently has become like Kleenex. It's like a word or a phrase that means a lot of different things to people. And I'll try to distinguish that as I go through it. But keep in mind, Icore is the program name that NSF uses and now is actually letting other agencies use as well. So here's the key thing, and I think sometimes this gets lost, but it was developed by entrepreneurs like Steve, and taught by entrepreneurs. So one of the things that we really emphasize with the course is that we try to bring in people that have actually been out there and done a startup. Now, if you ever come into one of my cohorts, you'll hear all about my startup story, and I won't bore you with it today. But one of the reasons I love this methodology is I look at it and I think, boy, I wish I had known that 20 years ago. It would have saved me $10 million in probably 10 years of time. So we try to bring people in that have actually been out and had entrepreneurial experience to be the instructors in the course. They also have to be good teachers too, and that's obviously a tough combination often to find. But really, this is a big emphasis for
And can I ask a question real quick?
Yes.
Just how many people, I'm going to ask 3 categories. Know you want to start a company or be part of a startup. Might, maybe, and know you don't want to be in a startup or start a company. So who's in the first? Who definitely wants to start a company? Good, that's over half. And who maybe, sort of, not sure. All right, and don't be shy. I was in this category at one point probably. Don't really know enough, or not, know for sure you don't want to, or don't know enough that you would want to. Okay, good. And this program is equally great for all 3 categories. So don't feel like this doesn't apply to you. Right?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And one of the things, and I mentioned Icore has become sort of shorthand now for a lot of things, and people equate it with lean startup. But the reality is the I stands for innovation. It's not necessarily just startup. So there are lots of outcomes, obviously, from the program. A couple of quick points you may have seen. This is a long time ago. This article about lean startup that Steve wrote in Harvard Business Review. I won't worry about that. There's a good article in The Economist. But I'd like to jump right to this quote. This has nothing to do with Icore, except I love the quote. Buzz Aldrin, second man on the moon, said, "You promised me Mars colonies, and instead I got Facebook. So this is what we wanted, and this is what we got. And as my kids tell me, this is old now, this is what we now have." I didn't even know what this was, so they explained it to me. I call it the $22 billion ghost, right? And we'll see how long that valuation holds up. But the reason I bring that up as an example is that's really not the focus of Icore. So when people hear lean startup and lean methodology, they often think, well, that's great for people who are writing apps, right? That's great for software, but it doesn't apply to us because we do really sophisticated stuff, like life sciences and physical sciences and all that complex.
Or a microchannel reactor for methane conversion.
That's right. I should ask, who's the microchannel? Okay, yes, all right. It's a perfect example, right? You would think logically that doesn't apply to me, right? But what's unique about Icore is that we do take these principles from that lean startup world and apply it to these complex engineering, science-based concepts. And I mentioned life sciences. We'll come back to that at the end. But there was a big debate way back in the beginning of whether this would apply to life sciences at all, right? If you're developing a new drug that takes 10 years and $1 billion to get to market, how can you use this methodology? And I'll kind of explain how we change it a little bit for those types of folks, but we absolutely do use the same core set of tools to help these teams figure out how to bring their product to market and build a business around the idea. Okay. All right. So that's the spirit of Icore. Dean's already mentioned it, and Evan mentioned it. The Icore Innovation Network, or I should say the National Innovation Network. And by the way, you won't be able to read this, and it's actually already a year old. I noticed this is the last one I had from NSF. At the time, they had 7 nodes. We're from the DC node, and 36 sites. I think now it's over 50 sites. So there are a lot of folks in this network. So the primary difference between a site and a node is the nodes are multi-institutions. So we actually, in our location, it's George Washington, University of Maryland, Virginia Tech, and now Johns Hopkins. And we run regional programs that extend beyond our campus. The sites are single institutions and typically work on campus, right, to provide training related to Icore. But we're all supposed to be part of the same network, and we're here actually to kind of build better bridges with the Pitt site and the CMU site as well. Okay, so that's kind of how they work. If you have questions about that, let me know. So a couple quick things. And again, this changes regularly too. So there have been over 1,000 teams that have been through Icore. The asterisk is here because it's rolling as we speak. There are 3 cohorts right now ongoing. And the high level takeaway here is about 50%, of the teams that come into Icore end up converting into companies. So the original goal when NSF set it up was this was going to be a program for academic teams, pre-company, to figure out whether they wanted to set up a company after they went through the program. But that has changed, and I'm going to explain that in a moment. Now, and we're getting more and more SBIR companies into the program. So we're doing kind of 2 flavors of Icore. I'll come back to that, as I said, here in a few minutes. So there's been a lot of money raised, and this number is actually very much an estimate because we work with a lot of teams, as you do regionally, locally, that don't even get rolled up into this number. But a fair amount of money has been raised around the program. And as I like to say, Icore is now the premier federally funded innovation and commercialization program in the U.S. It's become so popular that other countries are now coming to us. We're working with Mexico and other countries to actually stand up similar programs because they're very intrigued by what we're doing. And we're from DC, so I have to show Trump Tower, I mean the White House. Just kidding. You know you're popular when the president starts talking about you. And just a couple years ago, they made an announcement that Icore, they were going to roll it out. This was, you might remember him. And they were going to roll it out actually, and the Senate actually and the Congress have gotten behind this. So it's a bipartisan thing. The good news is that Icore seems to have really bipartisan support, right? It seems to fit in that sort of nice sweet spot, if there is one anymore. And if you want to read about it, Steve Blank just talked about the fact that last year, the very last act of Congress of 2016 is they sort of embedded Icore in some law somewhere. I don't know what it ultimately will mean for us, but I think in general it's all good. So the main message to take away here is there's a lot of concern, as you all might imagine, in DC about programs that are coming and going and no one knows kind of where they're going to land. But Icore continues to have tremendous support, apparently, from both sides, which is good for us, I think, overall. We've now expanded into 6 new agencies, so I have to tell you a quick story. So this morning I got up, we were staying at the Wyndham Hotel. I'm a bit of a coffee snob, so I pulled out Yelp and I looked up, where's the best coffee place close by? So I went out and I ran over to this place about 6 blocks away. I was sitting there all by myself, and in walks somebody from Pitt that works locally here with small business. And he came into an SBA-sponsored program here just about a year ago, where I was the trainer and helped train these folks. So we're now rolling out Icore not just to NSF, but into the SBA, NIH, DOD is adopting it. So we're finding more and more agencies. NASA is starting to send us teams. So more and more teams are coming, or I should say agencies are coming to NSF and saying, we'd really like to model use your program. And they're tending to send teams into the existing program. So they aren't developing their own standalones. The only one that's kind of customized the curriculum is NIH, which would help them slightly customize what they're doing. So real quickly, let me explain how it's now evolved into the SBIR program. Are people familiar with the SBIR program at all? Anybody have a guess how many companies are funded through the SBIR programs across the multiple agencies every year? Any guess? Everybody's looking down at their laptops. Nope, I don't have a guess. Well, 6,000 plus is the typical number. So there are a lot of small businesses and startups funded by the SBIR programs across the different agencies. And the big agencies are NSF, NIH, NASA, DOE, and DOD. So if you're building a startup and it's a technology-based startup, one of the best places to look for money is the SBIR program. So that's once you've set the actual startup up, so to speak. Right? That's when you are a real company. So that's why, and if you look at the actual numbers, what's kind of fascinating is if you look at very early stage investments in this country, don't let anybody tell you any differently. The federal government is the primary funder of small technology-based businesses. Over 90% of the small investments made in early seed stage investments made in this country are through the SBIR programs, not from venture capital. Venture capital likes to come in a little bit later. So if you're building a brand new startup around a technology, science-based sort of startup, SBIR makes a lot of sense. So that's one of the reasons we've actually moved the training into that. So I like to call it the world's largest seed fund. Has anybody ever heard of an accelerator? Anybody know what Y Combinator is, or Techstars, or all these fancy places? I'm sure there's several in Pittsburgh. These places you can go and you can get assistance, right? They call them accelerators. So what's the difference between an accelerator and what an incubator is? So it's kind of a new model, this idea that we'll invest in you and help accelerate you, hopefully somewhere good, right? Hopefully somewhere good. So we've kind of all heard about this. So what does it actually mean? To make something happen faster, as I like to say. Anybody ever been a part of an incubator? There are lots of incubators around. Accelerators are kind of the new model. We'll invest a little bit, we'll help you, we'll provide some guidance. So this is the upshot here. Not just resources, but direction. And so to some degree, I want you to think of Icore as that. Because the federal government, again, has been funding SBIR companies and been funding academic research for a long time. But Icore is the first program that's provided guidance, if you will, around the areas of commercialization and trying to create your own company. So it really is, to some degree, an acceleration program, in this case, a state and federally funded one. Anybody have any questions about that? That's my high-level overview. So I'm going to stop here. Yes, go ahead.
So I just wanted to throw in an analogy, because I talked earlier about how it's applicable equally for if you want to start a company, or if you're not sure, you don't. So one of the cool things about the Icore program, because it's geared for teams at the academic level, at the academic stage, it's kind of like this sort of sandbox opportunity to see if there's something there. And if there is, that's great. You saw half the companies, half the teams form companies. But if there isn't, you can still go back to your lab, and what you've learned is equally applicable to other things in your research portfolio, other ideas in the future. And one of the expectations of those teams, since it's 3 team members, they intentionally, and NSF intentionally has 3 different roles, with one of them being a faculty member. Especially if you're a tenured faculty member, you're unlikely to quit your job to go do this full time, and that's fine. They want you to be part of that initial academic program, and then you can go back and sort of instill that culture and some of these tools and methods in your lab for others in your lab, whereas maybe a postdoc or a PhD student might be the one to start the company. But one of the cool things I wanted to mention about the SBIR program, SBIR is now like the next step, where, like, for the people who are ready to start a company, you actually have to have a company apply for it. So if you read Steve Blank's blog, well, first of all, you can get close to about $1 million in free money through the SBIR program. You know, if you go get money from an investor, if you get $1 million from an investor, you've probably given up a good chunk of your company. They want a percentage ownership of your company, whereas this is free money, right? So you can get almost $1 million in free money, and if you go through the Icore academic program, your chances of winning the SBIR go way, way, way up. And Steve Blank has a blog post about this, how basically the acceptance rate of SBIR teams is like 4 or 5 times higher for teams that first went through the Icore program compared to those who didn't. So I just kind of want to give a little context of what does this national program offer you, because you've got this great short program at Pitt, but what do you get once you get plugged into the national level? And it's potentially another $1 million in funding plus connection to the ecosystem. I just want to kind of throw that out there.
That's a great point. It gave me time to put this mic on too. So go ahead. Question.
Can you comment on like the time between steps though? So as you move through that process, you know, applying for SBIR funding, you know, if it's like a normal NIH cycle, that takes time, and say you don't get funded or whatever, you know, what do people do during that time? Is there, what's to be done, I guess, about the time lapse that can occur between steps?
So that's a very good question, and there are multiple answers. I'll try to give a general one. So to build off of what Dean said, you know, a lot of the teams that we take through Icore, by the way, if you come through Icore, you get a $50,000 grant. Let's say you're an academic team, you come through Icore, you get $50,000 to go explore the commercial potential, right, of your technology. At that point, you're looking at, okay, well, do we set up a company or not? Let's say you decide you want to. The typical trajectory for teams that come out of Icore and say we want to set up a company is they do want to apply for an SBIR. And you're absolutely right, the time frame is sort of the killer there, so to speak. With NSF, they move a little bit more quickly in some cases, but not a lot than NIH. Often you apply and you don't get money for 6+ months if it all goes well. So you could be anywhere from 6 to 12 months waiting for that funding to actually come in. Now it's about $250,000, so it's a decent amount of money, but you've got to cover the time period. So how do people cover that? That's a good question. It all depends on the actual company and what they're trying to do. If you're in the life sciences field, it's more challenging because they're often more expensive things that you're putting more money towards things than you would in other situations. Now, once you're in the SBIR program, phase 1 lasts about a year, right? You have a full year there, and then you can apply for phase 2, and at some point in phase 1, you can put your submission in for phase 2. So there's still a little bit of a gap in funding there. You get up to like $750,000 in phase 2. And the sort of typical trajectory is, of the teams, companies that come into phase 1, about 30% of them get a phase 2. That's been the historical number. You can look it up online, but think of it that way. About 30% of the phase 1 companies go on to get a phase 2, and that puts you at $750, then you're into it for $1 million. And there are, depending on the agency, NIH, NSF, NASA, there are other opportunities occasionally to get some additional money. They're all a little bit different. The best thing to do is check out the SBA website. But you're right, one of the big challenges is that is kind of chunky money. Comes in at certain points, so you've got to plan ahead for it. Now, one of the things that I know in the state of Maryland, you may have that in Pennsylvania, we have it in Virginia where I happen to live, and sometimes there are state groups that also provide funding, sometimes matching funding for the SBIR program to help you cover those sort of funding requirements. So we definitely recommend you look into those as well. Yes?
Not knowing the nuts and bolts or even the beginnings of how to launch a company and yet being interested in the SBIR program,
Right.
My question is what percentage of that money can go into research and development? Are there percentages, maximums that go towards science versus running or maintaining a company?
Okay, so another great question. I'm going to repeat it. If I miss something, let me know. So the basic point was, hey, I don't know how to start a company. I don't know how all that works. Can you tell me kind of how the funding breakdown and allocation works? Let me try to answer it generically speaking for a minute. The Icore program, if you get $50,000 for Icore, all commercialization, right? You're using that to explore the commercial potential. No research, not a dime goes to your technology in Icore. All getting out of the building, talking to prospective customers. To get a phase 1 SBIR though, guess what? You have to actually show that there's still technical risk. They will not grant you the money if you can't show there's still technical risk. So in a weird, odd way, the $250,000 is not for continued market exploration, it's for reducing that technical risk. But when they actually choose the companies to get the grants, they want to see what your commercialization plan is. Because fundamentally, they don't want you reducing the technical risk if nobody's going to want it at the other end. So interestingly, the SBIR money is very tightly controlled, and I would recommend, again, based on the agency you're interested in, look at their guidelines. They're all slightly different, all slightly different. Don't know why that's not working. Oh, wait, there it is.
We've got our panel about 5 minutes.
Okay.
Just as an FYI, we got some people who went through the national program or a version of the national program, so you can hear directly from them rather than from us of what their experience was like, what they learned from it, what they got out of it, what they didn't get out of it, that kind of thing. We're going to do that in about 5 minutes, but we still have a little bit of time for other
more
questions.
Go ahead.
Can you talk more about the two positions that the team should have, like a academic lead and entrepreneur and advisor, and who could serve the gap?
Yeah, I'll do that real quickly, and I think probably the panel will address it too. But when you come into the official NSF I-Corps program, I'm going to take this off. When you come into the official NSF I-Corps program, they expect 3 people on a team. What they call the entrepreneurial lead, who is typically a student, grad student or postdoc, sometimes an undergrad, but usually a grad student. A principal investigator, typically a faculty member, and then a mentor. And the mentor ideally is someone that's had some practical experience, perhaps building a startup or coming from industry, and usually outside of your orbit, right? They prefer that you get a mentor that's not part of the university. It's better to have someone from the outside. At least they think it is in general. So there are 3 people on the team. The entrepreneurial lead does the vast majority of the speaking. Anybody that's been through, and you'll hear this, has to do most of the presentations. The PI, though, must be involved. They want the PI to commit 15 to 20 hours a week. And then the mentor, they want to be involved at that level too, to the extent that they can. The mentor kind of acts as a bridge between the team and the sort of teaching team. And we'll talk more about that in the panel. Just real quick follow-up.
So, yeah, some
Go ahead.
question about the mentor part, because when we want to send teams to the national, it's fine for the PI, fine for the postdoc. But to get a mentor to get 15 hours a week is the hard part, and I think that's been a roadblock
Right.
for a number of our potential teams to go national. So do you want to comment, or that's a little technical?
Let me comment quickly, only because the dean can share this too. We were both mentors. So I sort of see 3 reasons why someone would want to be a mentor. Number 1, it's an opportunity to give back. And you're lucky if you find those people, right? Number 2, it's somebody like one of us who literally, you just want to continue learning and you like this methodology, it looks interesting to you and you want to learn what it's all about. So that was a big motivator. And frankly, and they'll tell you this, a lot of times mentors are looking for their next opportunity. And although NSF doesn't push that, a lot of mentors have gone on to be parts of the teams later. So there's a little bit of you're looking for the right mix, and it's not easy. The hardest thing to find, I'll be honest, I think is mentors. It's not an easy thing to do. We have had several that have repeated, by the way. Yes?
Can you clarify what you said before? The entrepreneurial lead, does it have to be a student or can it be a student?
Both. Meaning, I think I can say both. Meaning it's typically a student. I can't think of a time when it wasn't an active. We've occasionally had a student that just recently graduated. There have been some odd situations, and I don't mean that in a negative way, where there have been people in transition that have come in. And honestly, if you have a team and you have a question about that, the best thing to do is to ask NSF. They have moved to a model now where they're starting to let 2 ELs and a mentor come in if there's a PI of record back at the home institution. And I can't speak, I've not done that yet, but they're moving to that model as well, so that the PI doesn't always have to be involved. Because we've had a lot of PIs that have gone through the program once that want to send other students through but don't want to go through themselves. So it's a good question for NSF though.
The reason I'm asking is typical situation would be one of 2 things. One is what you said, a student who's about to graduate. Second would be typically a postdoc of some sort who was never a student but an employee of the university, who then wants to continue in some fall. And I guess they could, I don't think they can stay a postdoc and continue this.
Yeah, we have definitely had teams where the entrepreneurial lead was in between school and work. And in fact, this NIH cohort we just finished, we had 2 students that had just graduated. This was their first job. It's a good opportunity for them.
I'm going to jump in just real quick on this. Phil Brooks with the Innovation Institute on Entrepreneur in Residence. And in response to your question, I have in direct conversations with NSF, they've said if the person has graduated within the last year, they'll accept them, but there's all sorts of scenarios. If you have questions, just come to us in the Innovation Institute and we'll just contact them. So I actually have a call with the lead project officer next week, so send me your questions this week.
And Phil was a mentor, by the way, as well, right? Yeah, so multiple times or just twice, right? So.
Yeah, I think he brings up a good point. They have continued to sort of evolve requirements. So if you have any question, best to talk to Phil, who can talk to NSF. And they're pretty reasonable. Yes, NSF.
Last question.
If you're a part of a team that took part in the first part of the NSF I-Corps program at the university and you're interested in the national level, is the formal process solicitation 12602 that's on the NSF site? Is that how you actually apply to become a part of the national program?
There is and I think you're referencing the team solicitation number,
Yeah.
and the short answer is yes. But interestingly, this is a very different, the way NSF runs the Icore program is a little different than most. What I mean by that is if you have an idea, you should contact them directly with an executive summary. They used to basically wait until you were accepted before you had to go through the formal process. So I would reach out to them first, see what they need, and then respond in that way. Don't worry about putting together the whole thing before you contact.
And by them, you mean people in Maryland and Virginia, or
NSF.
people in Pittsburgh? Okay.
NSF. I would start with your folks here.
Okay.
We don't need to be involved, but then they would talk directly to NSF.
So as we transition the panel, maybe the last final comment is like, is the Icore program something that fits with what you're trying to do? And if so, you've got lots of people who will help you construct a team that qualifies. So don't worry about the qualification eligibility first. Like figure out if are we at the right stage? Does this do what we want to do? And if so, you know, Phil and his team and the other people, they're going to work really hard to try to find a complete team for you. Right? And that's how you generally work.
Yeah, just all you have to do is it's a one-page application initially, and there's 2 quick phone calls before you go into the details of 12602. We have all the ones that have gone to national, so we sort of know how to structure those. They're very quick. It's the fastest grant process I've ever seen, and I've been involved with a lot of grant writing. So you'll be pleased by how easy you can get through the process. So just come call us or stop by.
All right, we're going to transition here, and maybe I'll make an analogy. And you know, sometimes you talk to a faculty member, and they'll tell you how great their class is, and then you talk to the students, and you're like, are they talking about the same class? You get a very different side of the story. So we're
That may happen to you, never to me, Dean.
So in that vein, I mean, we've got some team members who